Tybed beth sy'n tu ôl y drws coch yma? Gawn ni weld. Ho, ho, ho. Ho, ho, ho. Toyota Celica. A pwy sy'n byw efo? Nicky Grist.
Bore da, boys. What do you think?
This is beautiful, Nick. This is a work of art, isn't it?
Well, I won my first World Championship rally in one of these. I won my first Rally GB in one of these. But what really swayed me towards a Toyota was spending 4 months in Kenya testing and developing this in readiness for the '92 season. It was so strong, it never missed a beat. I just fell in love with the car.
Now, this car was involved. It's an ex-works car.
It is.
It was one of the team cars, driven by Didi Oriol and Carlos Sainz.
Yes.
But it's been totally reprepped back into your Portugal winning car, yeah?
It is, yeah. The car was first built for Carlos in 1992 when he was going for the World Championship, and it was built brand new for Australia. Then Didier used it in Sweden '93 in Castrol colours, and you know, the fact it's an ex-factory car was enough for me. It would have been nice to have had an ex-Kankkunen Grist car. But
I guess
just...
there aren't many of them left, are they? Because most of them were mangled.
No, they are a bit. And this was a really popular car, so a lot of them were rallied into extinction.
Yeah.
So that's why you don't see many. But we won our last World Championship rally for Toyota in one of these, this shape car in this colour scheme. So, and that's why it's like it is.
Where do you get it then? Where do you find it?
It belonged to an Irish guy who was being prepped up in Yorkshire, actually, with Johnny Milner. So we bought it, and fortunately for me, an ex-factory mechanic, Don Woolfield, was local to me, and I set up a workshop area, and he worked here for 18 months to rebuild the car, basically, and it's taken all that time, get the bits and pull it all together.
I won't be really cheeky and ask how much it's cost, but I'll ask you how much it's worth. Is that a difficult one?
Yeah, well, yeah, a little bit, I suppose.
250 grand?
Probably between 200 and 250 at current prices, I would say. But they're going to go up because certain cars are going up and up and up in value. People haven't got hold of Toyotas just yet.
Now, I know for a fact that you've actually used this car with Juha in Spain, and I can see there's some evidence up on the top of the cupboard there that you you didn't have a brilliant event.
No,
but that must have been pretty special, getting back in one of these cars with Juha Kankkunen.
It was, and you know, you are always like this car, but this accident bizarrely happened on a road section. First thing in the morning, he spun and hit a wall. He said, "I can't believe it." I said, "You can't believe it, it's my car." Back in the day, you wouldn't care, because you just hand the keys back and off you go.
Yeah.
But,
I bet that was an interesting conversation when it came to paying the bill.
Well, there was no conversation. I paid. So that was the end of it.
You got stitched up at the very first time for you.
But that's normal for these boys, you see.
Oh, fantastic. Talk us through the spec. What is the car like?
Well, this is from the Group A era. So the Group A era was to look standard. So basically, no fancy wings like you've got nowadays.
So is this a 205 or an 186?
It's a 185.
A 185
is the model. But in the Group A era, while the basic engine is the same, the exhaust and inlet manifolds had to be standard, but obviously the engine's been modified, the whole engine bay's been changed. And only when you start to re-prep these things do you realise that nothing in this car is standard.
So how difficult has it been to get bits?
Quite tough.
What's been the worst part to find?
Gearbox casing. Gearbox casing.
All right. How much?
Well, I had a slight crack in the one I had, and it's all split into 4 parts, and this part cost me 5,000 quid. Just for the casing.
And you couldn't have it re-welded or re-prepared? No.
Well, it's made of magnesium. And, you know, you can get... People have made modern reproductions of stuff in aluminium, but I wanted to keep it as it was on the day.
Where did you find one of them?
I managed to get one from Germany.
Right.
Yeah.
Because Jari-Matti Latvala has got quite a few of these, isn't he?
He has,
was the the man to go to, wasn't he, for bits at one stage? Is he still?
Well, he's been buying up a lot of stuff as well. Right. And, you know, fair dues to Yari. I mean, he's with 165 going back even earlier, those are, if anything, a little more difficult to get.
So engines there, where's the gearbox? On that side?
Gearbox is here.
And then there's a centre diff then, which splits the power to the front and the rear, yeah?
Exactly. And now all that had to be rebuilt as well, and that was another 5,000 quid. Everything seemed to be 5,000 quid. I had to rebuild the turbo. That cost me 5,000 quid. It was the Irish converted it to right-hand drive, and we put it back to left-hand drive. And fortunately, all the pickup points and everything for the pedal box was there. New steering rack, 5,000 quid. It just, you know, you knew that if you wanted anything serious, it was never going to cost much less than 5,000 quid. You know, there are bits and pieces here which are cheaper. But more than that, obviously it was a little bit scruffy when we bought it. And having put that money in, it is an investment almost. And you're probably better off putting your money here than you are in premium bonds, really.
Definitely sticking in the bank, for sure.
Yeah, you know, the thing is, having Don Woolfield, who used to be a car builder back in the day, he knew exactly how they built and how we built them. And that's exactly what he's done. He's brought it back to life.
What about your part of the cockpit here then? How comfortable were you inside here? Because it looks a little bit like the Starship Enterprise with all the gadgetry.
Well, when you look at these cars nowadays, there's nothing in the car. There's no switches, there's hardly anything. Everything's low down. But in these days, it was a different thing. You know, you've got to consider that we're talking almost 30 years ago. So we've all got these push switches, little fuses, and it looks busy, doesn't it? It looks like there's a lot going on.
You've got the handbrake in the ordinary position for the handbrake there.
Yeah.
What's that other chrome lever then?
That's got an adjustable front anti-roll bar, which on tarmac particularly, and to a point on gravel, if conditions change, you could make it softer at the front or harder just by pulling the lever back and forth.
Obviously, that was quite a big thing for this car then, if they had to do that then, was it?
Well,
it made a big difference.
You know, the thing is, the Toyota Team Europe were a brilliant team. And everything is so massively over-engineered in the car, but it was built for reliability more than beauty. And I would say there were arguably prettier cars in Group A period, but this car particularly was very functional. It was reliable, powerful, and it won a lot of rallies. And this was Toyota's most successful ever Celica.
So who would pull that lever then? Would he tell you to pull it or would he pull it?
No, he'd generally tweak that himself. But to be honest, Juha was the kind of guy that can overcome a lot of things. You know, he was a very naturally talented driver and he could drive round issues, but he would just adjust that and it was fairly easy for him to do so.
What's that red button just to the right of the gear lever? That, yeah?
That's for push-to-talk radio.
Ah, right.
So that's...
He wouldn't use that much either, would he?
Well, not too bad.
Pretty cool old dude, wasn't he?
No, well, he'd finish the stage, wind the window down 1 inch, and then he'd get a little cigar.
Where were the cigars held?
Well, he had a little pocket on this side, look. So everything's in there, and he'd be smoking going down the road section, holding the cigarette to the window. And fair dues, he never used to smell much smoke at all. But he was such a relaxed, easy kind of going guy. It was remarkable. Yeah.
Let's can you still get in the car this side?
Of course I can.
Come on, then, let's see.
Well, I tell you one thing for sure, you couldn't get in there anyway.
I'll get in the driver's seat, look.
No, you're not getting in anywhere. It's the damage you would cause along the way.
Oh, slipped in like an old glove, didn't you? Fair play.
So there you are.
You can still reach all the buttons.
Yes,
What's
you
the
can
middle
do.
corral before the middle trip, then? What's that?
Well,
for Juha?
Yeah, basically, this piggybacks off that.
Yes.
So on there, we generally just had the speedo.
Right.
So the driver could see...
Would he ever say to you, hey, boy, look, we're doing 160?
No, not at all, no. There was none of that. He was just fully concentrated. But, you know, with all of this, you know, once you've made your settings, that was it. Off you went.
I'm going to ask you a really awkward question now, right? If you had one rally to do, right, with one driver that you've been with, who would you pick from the drivers that you were with?
Oh, that's a tough one.
No, you've got 5 seconds to answer the question. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Well, no, that's cruel.
I know, I'm cruel.
I mean, the thing is, Kankkunen and McRae were both very similar, very naturally talented drivers. And from inside the car, everything felt like slow motion, really, because they were that clever in setting the car. I suppose from an out-and-out speed and excitement point of view, you'd have to choose Colin. If you want to win a world championship, you'd probably choose Kankkunen, because he was cool, calculating, and, you know, he would plan his way around the championship. And, you know, having watched Safari last weekend, you know, I don't think the modern drivers are that calculating.
Nice little lead-in answer there into Safari. That's one of the things we wanted to talk about. That was a very watered-down version of Safari to what you were involved in developing this car for. Somebody said that the whole of the first day was shorter than... The whole of the first day...
15 Ks longer.
Was 15 Ks longer than one of the selectives when you did it.
Shall I tell a story?
Yeah, go on, yeah, you tell the story.
The whole of the first...
Do you want a hand to get out of there? I can't, social distancing.
Basically, in 2002, which was the last time we did Safari, the first day was made up of 4 sections, and that was 15 kilometres further than the whole of this year's rally. And we had another 2 days to go. Now, if you go back to 1992, when we did it with this car,
ago.
The route was 5,000 kilometres. So bearing in mind, they did 320 this week. So 5,000 kilometres.
How much of that would have been competitive then?
You probably would have had 80% of it.
80%?
At least 80. But then you'd have to go on some road sections, you'd have to go flat out to make up service time.
What was the longest competitive section you can remember?
253 Ks, which was Sultan Hamid to somewhere else.
253 Ks, that's about 180, 170 miles.
Which effectively is 70 Ks less than they did in this year's rally in total.
Yeah.
And I'd actually had to co-drive for Carlos Sainz on that section.
Did you? How did that all come about? Was that when Lewis Moyer pooed himself?
No, he basically... Lewis went down with a fever, really bad fever. And you could imagine, we'd done the route, I don't know, 5 times, I expect.
And who were you with?
Mikael Eriksson.
Mikael Eriksson, yeah.
So, Swedish driver.
Yeah, yeah.
And basically, we had done the recce, and he decided, listen, I'm not going to do the recce for another time. He said, I've had enough, I'm going to go down to the coast. And he took his girlfriend and off he went. So I was just sat at the pool in the Serena in Nairobi. And Carlos now was pacing up and down the pool because he was frustrated because he couldn't go recceing, you see. He said, listen, this is a problem. We've got the longest section of the rally I haven't even seen yet. And I said, well, listen, I know where I'm going. I said, I'll never be able to write Spanish notes. But if we go and buy a tape recorder, some spare batteries and tapes, I said, I'll navigate you through the section. You dictate onto the tape. And then I said, Lewis can rewrite them at night in his bed.
Oh, he loved that.
And he said, that's a brilliant idea. So that was it. That was the only time I co-drove Carlos Sainz. But it actually helped because he was driving flat out, as you could imagine, talking as fast as he could. The next minute you hit something really bad and bounce, bang, bang. He goes, no. Mas, Fernando. Right, okay, we go. Whoosh, and off we go again. And basically, he said when he went to check them, they did manage to check them. He said they're the best notes he had ever made because he could make them so fast in the first place.
Yeah. What did he finish on the rally? What did he finish in that?
He won the rally.
He won the rally. So
he won the rally.
A nice little story to have in the old, you know, you made a difference there.
Well, he went on to win the championship that year, didn't he?
Yeah.
So.
What do you see when you see your son now in Formula One? Do you see likenesses to Carlos?
Oh, no, you can. You can see Carlos in Carlos Jr., obviously. But I think it's such a different sport. Do you know what I mean? And
do you think Carlos is in the background and giving him having an influence?
I would say yes, to a point. But the thing is, the sports are so different, aren't they? And I think it's probably a world that Carlos would understand, but doesn't really know.
Yeah.
And
I've seen some great, they've done some great PR stuff, and they're with Carlos Senior and Carlos Junior, and there's a real connection with them, isn't there? It's really nice. And then you think you see that, and then you see Carlos going off to Dakar, don't you?
Yeah.
And still involved himself, and still able to drive. Like.
well, and picking up, deals all along, because isn't he tied up with Audi now, doing some stuff with some off-road stuff as well.
Brilliant.
So, he was an incredibly hard worker, Carlos Sainz. And if Junior's anywhere near the same, he's going to be successful.
Yeah, we had the pleasure of working with him in Indonesia once, and it was a massive, massive eye-opener.
Yeah.
How, he oozed energy, didn't he? And he wanted to know, and he always asked your opinion. And, he was asking me and Gwyndaf, who had no experience, Gwyndaf, what do you think? And I used to say to him, why is he asking us? Like, this is a guy who's won a world championship. And, Gwyndaf said he doesn't never stop learning. You never stop learning.
But it was funny when we were teammates with him in Ford with Colin, because...
Oh, I bet Colin would wind him up.
Oh, terrible. And, we'd all be meeting at 6 o'clock in the morning down at the hotel reception. But then we'd all be three of us, Lewis, Carlos, myself, sat in the bus waiting for Colin to go. And he's there now, and you can see he's getting wound up. With Colin. I said, I've rung him, he's coming. This is getting stupid now. Go and get him. I said, he'll be here in a minute. He knows what time we're going to leave. But we're already late. And this is what he was like, you see.
Yeah,
and well, when, we'd go and do a test, and we'd test for a couple of days. And then Colin would come up with a test, right, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Right, boys, thank you very much. Lovely, I'm off. So then Carlos would arrive to do his test. And then on the first day, he'd be testing into the night, right? Spot lamps on and everything. And then they'd be going till 11 o'clock at night. Then the last day, still going late into the night. Then you'd get to the rally with your cars and your setup. Then you do the first stage or first couple of stages, and Colin would be faster. And then he'd go to service and say, please give me the setup that Colin's got. And that was Carlos, though. He'd have to try everything.
Yeah, he'd have to prove it to himself.
Yes, exactly.
Talking about Colin and Ford, I understand somewhere, or there were, some very special memories of the Colin days, which have recently gone for sale.
Yes.
I can't see them anywhere.
And sold.
And sold.
They're out of sight. Do you want to see?
Yeah, please.
So basically, it was Chris Harris from Top Gear said to me, oh, Christ, Nick, you've got to get rid of these. He said they'd be worth a fortune. And what these are the panels from our Focus from 2001 Rally GB, when we had a massive accident in Rhondda and destroyed the car, and we lost the World Championship. All we had to do was beat Richard Burns, but Colin being Colin, he pushes right to the very end. And these came available, and I bought them probably about, God, it must be about 11, 12 years ago, and they've been with me for a long time. Anyway, I put them up for auction. I mean, everybody said, well, why do you want to get rid of them? I said, well, I have the memory of the moment. I've got the pace notebooks, I've got the road books, I've got the racing overalls. I was in the car. I said, these are a bit big and bulky, and I think somebody else would go on and enjoy them equally as much. And I think, I'm not going to tell you who it is, but an avid collector bought them, and I know that he will enjoy and treasure them. And this can be his memory of that incident,
They should be in some kind of museum, shouldn't they? Or in some kind of collection.
Yeah, yeah.
That actual accident was pretty big, wasn't it?
It was a major one. Yeah, it corkscrewed us through the air, end over end, side over side, multiple times. And that was quite a big accident. But probably there was other accidents that we could class as being far more dangerous and could have been serious.
Now, obviously, you've got the car. We've talked about the car, but you've gone to specialise. You've had so many accidents. Now you've gone to specialise in safety, haven't you? And the mainstay of your business here at Nicky Grist Motorsport is Crash helmets.
The story behind all of that was the fact that I became friendly with Stilo crash helmets. It's a new helmet they released this year. This is what the exact model and specification of the helmets that the drivers are using, Elfyn and rhoi'r and such like in the WRC. It's the highest safety standard that you can get. You could do a Formula One race with that. But the key to it is its weight.
What's the myth about painting helmets then? Some people say you can paint them, some people you can't. You know, you see them all painted up. Are they stickered up? Is it okay to paint them?
No, it's okay to paint them as long as you're using non-corrosive paints. But you now, and I think they're looking to regulate who is actually an authorised painter.
What about sticking stickers on them?
Stickers is a no-go.
Is it?
You know, if you want to put a sticker on a peak, then that's fine. As long as you're not possibly weakening the protective shell.
What would weaken it then? The adhesive of the sticker may weaken the shell.
Exactly, over time.
How much would I have to pay for one of them? 63.5 in size?
£6,500
Is that with my obscene discount? Friends and family and all that?
Well, it's an obscene head size. I think you'd be very lucky to get one for that big, how?
60? How much you say? You've completely flummoxed me with that price. It didn't actually register. Say it again.
£6,500.
£6,500.
It is
then
the
I
most...
need a hands device, wouldn't I?
You would?
And how much is one of them?
Oh no, well you can get one of those for 180 quid, or we could.
But you wouldn't skimp, would you? If you're going to buy a £6,500 helmet, you'd have to have the best hands device.
Well, to be honest, this is the most important element. Right. The hands device, a cheap one or an expensive one, would protect you in the same way.
Explain to the layman what the hands device does.
Well, basically,
have we got one?
These clips. I will. I've got.
I tell you what, should we go in the showroom and you can show us on the seat? Yeah, let's
come on then.
Cut into the showroom. We are coming upstairs after, Tom. We'll chase you up there as well.
So basically, this fits over the driver's neck, like so, and it's locked into position by the hands, by the seat belts, exactly. But then if I take it off, on the back of the helmet, can you see these clips? Those connect onto these. So what effectively it does is when that's sat, the driver's head is here. If they have an accident, you basically would submarine, you go down and forward in the seat. But the whole geometry of this, with the seatbelt attached, the hands device will stay in position. So when you go down and forward, the hands device will stay where it is. And then the length of these tethers would then stop the helmet by going any further.
So stopping neck injury, neck ache, and stop you hitting the roll bar, which most people do in a big accident.
But what people don't realise, it's not the movement of going forward that kills you. It's the whip back that kills you, because your head, and with the weight of a crash helmet, you see, your head flips back.
And the tethers stop it going back as well.
No, it stops it going too far in the first place. Right. So basically, all it does, you know, if you can't go forward, you can't whip back.
What does hands actually stand for then? Head and neck safety device?
Well, hands and neck support. But that is a brand. It's now called FHR, frontal head restraint.
So when Gilles Panizzi said, I want to speak to Mr. Hands, years ago when he couldn't get on with the helmet, there was no Mr. Hands, was there? No, that was quite funny, that, wasn't it?
It was. I think it was new to everybody at that time. Yeah. And nobody liked to wear it, you know, and I went through the whole of my career virtually not wearing one, and it was fine for us. But in a certain accident, you know, it could end up saving your life. That's the thing.
What's this then? Can he take his drink through there then, can he?
Yeah.
He can have his lager.
Yeah, you can drink, you can have whatever you want. You know, you can have vodka and gin and tonic on tap if you wanted to, but I wouldn't recommend it in a race car.
Is that a Hands then, or is that just a
Oh, no, that's something for karting, for young kids.
Young kids. So all kinds of things is here as well. Now, suits, Mitsubishi, Armin Schwartz.
It was.
Skoda.
Colin.
Australia. GB in September.
That's right. Then Toyota. I've kept one of every race overall with the teams I've been with. With Toyota, I've got about 4 different designs of racewear. And this is probably the 95 season when we were excluded. And then we handed over the championship for Subaru to go and fight. And then next, of course, from Toyota is the blue Subaru overalls with Colin. And then, obviously, the Martini colours, which I have to say, the Martini racing colours I felt were some of the nicest colours.
Yes.
And I think out of the two motorsport branded vehicles, and probably two of the best in the world, one was the Toyota Castrol car, and then the Martini Racing, because the whole colour and the history behind Martini Racing was fantastic.
What's the story of that one in the corner then? That's a Kronos Citroen one. When was that then?
In 2006, Sebastian Loeb
Fell off his mountain bike.
broke his collarbone
Yes.
or shoulder or
Yes.
something, and we were drafted in to replace him. So, you know, last minute we were shipped off to the Rally of Turkey. We were car number 1, using all his tyre choices and everything, not having done anything for 6 months, you know, and then next minute we were thrust in at the deep end, only for the alternator to fail and for us to break down on the last stage with no power left in the battery.
One of the things that Nick's won a lot of, and he's a real expert in, is trophies, right? Now, I always thought that the man who designed rally trophies wants his eyes punching out because they're completely useless. Nobody really likes them. My missus hates them all. I've got loads of trophies in the attic. The only thing my missus will put out is glass, and that's to go in the washing machine, in the, what do you call that thing, the dishwasher once every 12 months. But you've won a lot of obscure trophies, and you've been lucky enough to put them here. But the worst trophy you ever won for winning Wales Rally GB or RAC Rally in 1993 is a bit of wood.
That.
And I had a car in wood for winning Group N. I think I beat him, actually, with trophy-wise. How about that for winning RAC Rally?
But the thing is, it was such a difficult rally. It was ice and snow, and it was treacherous, difficult.
Up in Yorkshire, wasn't it?
It was, yeah, and a little bit up in Kielder as well. And it was so difficult. And to come out of it unscathed and to win my first home round of the World Championship, I was full of it. And then they gave me that. And I've got that to keep since then. I'm obviously going to keep it.
Where does it live?
To be honest, sometimes in the cupboard here, sometimes elsewhere. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter where it lives. I just don't like it that much. And no disrespect, Network Q.
Network Q, no.
But there are some lovely stuff.
That steering wheel's quite nice in glass, isn't it?
Yeah, I've got a couple of those.
What's that from?
Portugal.
Portugal.
That's another Portugal one. And then there's some, this is from Australia.
I remember in your little house in when you lived in Gilbach, you had a massive trophy at the top of the stairs from Argentina.
Yeah, I've still got that. That's at home.
I think I might have peed in that one weekend when we stayed in your house.
It wouldn't surprise me in the least.
It was huge.
It was big. You know, only first and to my Network Q, because this was my first win, and that was my second win on...
Oh, there was obviously a lot more money in the budget the second time, wasn't there?
Well, it's a lot bigger.
Oh, you give them a bit of jip about
that. Now, that one on the end is obscure. Now, before you look at the labels, where would you say, just glancing at that comes from?
I wouldn't have a clue, because it's such an obscure... the obscure thing, trophies, isn't it? I'm going to bend down.
It's Rally... No, the wooden one, right on the very end.
Right on the very end. Oh, that's Kenya, isn't it? Guaranteed.
It's Rally Indonesia.
Indonesia.
Do you remember that?
I do remember that.
But some of the best trophies of all, and it's nice to have something different, something that tells you something about the country. But it was the trophies from Safari Rally. Yeah. And there was this wonderful artist, a man that makes these bronze castings of elephants and cheetahs and all manner. And I won this massive elephant. And the thing must weigh about 10 to 20 kilos. It was such a weight. But, you know, it's such a pleasure to look at. Yeah. You know, they're very expensive to buy as ornaments, but then to win Safari Rally, that made it even more special.
So based on what we've just talked about now, what are you giving out next weekend on the Nicky Grist stages?
Actually, crystal glass.
Oh, that's all right.
Yeah, some quality stuff.
Quality stuff. Something that's usable.
Yes,
absolutely. Some whiskey in it.
Yes. Oh, no, well, it's all, you know, you've got to give nice trophies. People, sometimes they're spending a fortune. a lot of money on tyres and fuel and hotels. So.
You know what? One of the nicest trophies I ever had. There's a guy in South Wales who used to take the bottoms off whiskey bottles, and he used to insert a car into the bottle, inscribe the bottle, and stick the bottom back on. And those are really nice. But when you get 2 or 3 of them, then they get a bit monotonous, don't they? Because they're huge things. But those were quite nice, and I kept a couple of them from years ago. Welsh Championship we used to give them out, didn't they?
That's right.
But something nice and something different. This has given you the opportunity to be able to do this, having this little showroom here and the unit here as well, and they've been able to display all this stuff. I'm sure people are in awe when they come here. You can come in here, you can buy your seats, you can buy your seat belts, you can buy your crash helmet, you can buy all your kit for inside the car. Yeah.
We can, basically. We've done all right. We've built it up over time, but I haven't done. There's another large motorsport company which I shan't mention, obviously, but they do everything. But that's a massive operation, millions and millions of pounds worth.
I bet people like to come here and buy stuff off Nicky Grist, don't they?
Well, they do.
They like that relationship. And that's quite important to a lot of people, isn't it?
Yeah. And there's always time to probably talk about memorabilia and what's here and why and little stories and, you know, they're getting stuff that they wouldn't get from
And I bet very few people try and knock you for a discount, do they? When they're dealing with Nicky Grist. Like.
Well, only you. But mouth almighty.
So, storeroom was over there, all the helmets are kept over there. What sizes do you range from? Can you fit most people who come through the door?
Most people, unless it's something bizarre.
How many helmets in there?
I don't know, there's probably somewhere in the region of about 80 odd. Right. 80 odd. So we get through a lot every year.
And this is your sort of reception fitting room. So where do you spend your day?
My day is spent upstairs in the office.
Let's go and have a look at that.
Paying bills, dealing with emails. Money. Yes, and telephone calls. So
I'll shut the door.
Some bits and pieces of more trophy memorabilia.
I tell you what, if I was a trophy designer, I'd completely redesign trophies. I think a lot of them are horrible, aren't they?
Yeah, they're not the best.
You make them useful, like.
Yeah, but it's always nice, though, to have something different. This is Tom. Tom's been working for me now for a couple of years. So...
All right, Tom.
How you doing, Howard?
Good, mate, you?
And
good.
This is Tom deals with the greater majority of customers, I have to say, and does a great job for me. So.
Oh, well done, Tom.
Very good of you to say so.
Good day to ask for a pay rise, I say.
I was just thinking about that.
And there's some great photographs up here as well, and I've had them put onto print.
That's in Germany.
Yeah.
In St. Wendel.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now that is actually a T-junction, and we are at the T-junction there.
I'll stop and give way.
And we did it as a loop. And just down the road from here, about 50 yards down the road, there was a big spectator area. And so we did the loop once, and the start, was to the back of the car on a bridge. Richard Burns was on the start line. So we did one loop, and then we came out of this junction, turned right, then turned left, back around, down the bypass, underneath the bridge where the start line was. Did a couple of loops off and back on, turned to come back up this piece of road again. So he's accelerating hard up the road, and he said to me, "Are we using this piece again?" I said, "No, we're not." So he comes to this junction in typical flamboyant McRae style, braked hard, couple of gears, threw it in sideways, and you can see, look at the exhaust exploding in the back there amongst the blue smoke off the tyres. And Richard Burns now is on the start line.
So Richard Burns is sitting here on the start line.
Right there. And Colin comes out of this junction broadside and out into the road, virtually backwards. Massive power slide, then a big throw left again round the hairpin. And Richard Burns just burst into laughter, and he almost missed the start. He was crying. But I
love that, I do. I love that. Inch perfect on the curb, look. Yeah. Look. That's awesome, that is. And that's obviously safari. That's what we were talking about last week. That's serious fesh, isn't it?
Well, that was our test car, actually. That was a press photo we did. That is in a place called Susva. It's down in the Great Rift Valley. And that is volcanic powder dust. And it literally is like talcum powder.
I bet that's not very good for the engine, is it?
Well, no, it's all geared for it, so it can take it.
This is the picture I wanted to pick up on. This one here.
Well, I have a good friend in Les Kolchek who, for many years, has travelled the World Championship as a photographer. And I said I'd love to do a collage of all my victories on one particular print.
Right, this is the second test of the day now. Name the 21 wins.
Oh, God. Right. First one is Argentina.
Yeah, that's Argentina.
Second one is Australia.
Yeah, that's Australia.
Third one is Rally GB.
Yeah.
In the snow and ice. Next one is Portugal.
Yeah.
Then we're into Subaru then.
Yeah.
Safari, which
Yeah.
I regard as probably one of my most enjoyable victories, and we can talk about that in a minute. Then we can, oh God, where are we going to go from there? Because we won 6 rallies this year. Corsica, then Acropolis.
Yes, I'm not sure. Yeah, okay.
Acropolis, then GB.
Down there.
Australia.
Correct.
Australia,
And then?
GB. But, oh, mush, there's so many. I tell you what, I'll get you a print for Christmas.
Oh, that'd be nice.
Yeah. You can put it in the kitchen, and you can do your homage to Nicky Grist in the kitchen every day when you're having your breakfast and your cereals.
Fantastic.
But Safari particularly, you know, when we talk about Safari, I mean, it was different. And you really do have to approach that rally in a completely different way. And you have to throw all normality and approach to rallies out of the way, out of your head, because you're dealing with a rally where the conditions are so extreme and you have to plot your way around it. And, you know, when I joined Colin for the first time, you know, you would have thought if there's one rally that wasn't for Colin McRae, it was Safari. So in 1997, when I did it with him, we went and did a test, and we went 25 Ks and 25 Ks back and made the notes. And I said, what are all this care, caution and triple cautions? And he said, well, that's warning me about the conditions. I said, well, listen, can we change something? I said, you know, I've come from drivers that have got a lot of experience here. And I said, if you're going to make a success of this, you've got to know not just when to go fast, but when to go slow and how slow. So we made you need another set of pace notes to suit the conditions. So obviously we had to make, you know, we decided, because he uses a number system related to gears for his speed, we had a descriptive system to tell him what gears on the roughness, and then describe what you were facing. But then you can look at a piece of road and the right-hand side could be rougher than the left-hand side. So you then have to describe the speed over the roughness and exactly what that roughness is and which side of the road for how long. Because you're always going left for 100 and then keeping right for 50. And
they didn't have so much of that last weekend, did they?
No, they didn't. They didn't.
But Colin would have had a very good mechanical sympathy as well. He was quite a good engineer, wasn't he? In you know, when it came down to it, he knew how hard and how much the car would take, like, and he was quite clever at repairing the car as well.
He was.
They don't seem to have these skills. These youngsters coming through now don't seem to have much skills, do they?
No, and I think when it comes to the mechanical side of things, it was a different thing. So, you know, at the end of the day, you know, when things were a lot more endurance based, that sort of element came into it a lot more. The events are shorter. It's more about flat out, let's go, let's win it. But Safari is not about that. And last weekend proved a point. And rallies in Turkey have proved the point as well. They've been disastrous at these events. Somebody's just got to be a bit smart, get the best result they can, and that'll help win world championships.
Now, moving on from Safari, next week, Nicky Grist Motorsport, the Nicky Grist Stages. It's going to be the first rally in the comeback after COVID. Massive, massive task. Fair play to Neil Cross and Quintin Motor Club. Looks like they're going to pull it off, Nick. How involved have you been? And, you know, how much of an influence have you had? And what are your feelings?
Well, the team at Quintin, Neil Cross, the clerk of the course, is very experienced. You know, he knows exactly what he needs to do. Obviously, the challenge of COVID has put another angle on it. The MOD have been shipping busloads of people for weeks now up onto the ranges.
I passed 23 lorries on the way down, actually.
Yeah.
They were all numbered. I didn't count them.
No, but the thing is, there is a very, very big training program going on. So in reality...
Why are we going to war then?
Not really, but they've got to train, haven't they? But the MOD have said to us, listen, guys, we've authorised your route. You can use those stages and roads you want to use, but at the end of the day, we actually want no spectators.
So what is your message to anybody that's thinking of going to spectate?
Please don't. And it's 1 year. I know we haven't had rallying for a long time. I myself sponsor the event. I'm not going because I'm not needed there. I'm not a part of the organising committee. I'm going to just take the trophies up on Friday and I'm going to go home and I'm going to watch everything on the internet. You know, and that's what I ask all the spectators to do. And it's just 1 year. But what we're dealing with here is a far greater thing than just missing spectating on the Nicky Grist stages. The future of Epint and all those roads are in jeopardy. You could ruin it for so many other spectators, so many other events, and so many other drivers. So, you know, stay away, just watch it on the internet. We've spent a fortune to try and bring all this social media and live footage to you. There is an alternative. Please use it.
Great stuff. Well, there we are. You've heard it from the sponsor. Stay at home, have a barbecue, watch it on the internet. Nick, thanks for letting us come around and have a look. Thanks for letting us have a look at your toys and your pictures. Interesting insight to lots of different things. You know, great. Thanks very much. Yn y garej efo Howard, efo Nicky Grist. Dyma ni.